Hello everybody, my name is Liam Doran from accountancyschool.ie, and this is a short presentation to introduce you to the changes that are coming about to the P2 examination with effect from September of 2018. As I'm sure most people at this stage are aware, the ACCA are changing quite a number of the subjects on the P level. Each of the subjects are going to have compulsory questions going forward with no opportunity for a choice of questions that can be examined or answered in the examination. And the P1 and the P3 syllabus has been amalgamated together into one new subject called the Strategic Business Leader. And then there's a change being made to P2. Effectively, with effect from September of 2018, we're no longer going to have a P2 exam. In future, it's going to be called the Strategic Business Reporting Exam Paper. The ACCA themselves are looking upon this as an evolution of the way that they examine the P2 or the corporate reporting matters on their syllabus, as opposed to it being a revolution. So even though the syllabus isn't going to change a lot, you are going to be looking at a different approach that you're going to have to give to the way that you answer the questions that are asked. It is a new subject. It's going to replace P2. It's a compulsory subject. The syllabus is pretty much the same as the syllabus that we have for P2 with a few small amendments. But the big move is that there's going to be less number crunching, and that's going to be particularly evident on question 1. You'll no longer get the opportunity to be able to do one full consolidated question. Instead, what they'll do is they'll examine elements of groups in question 1, and they'll get you to give a discussion with regards to why you've done what it is you've done, or the purpose behind accounting for matters in a particular fashion. In addition to that, they're introducing a lot more interpretation, particularly into the question. The next slide I have here kind of gives a main overview, I suppose, of the differences between the existing P2 exam and the new SBR exam. And if we concentrate on the right hand side, you'll notice that it's still a 3 or 15-minute exam, and there are going to be 4 questions on the exam paper. They're all going to be compulsory. So you'll no longer have a choice in section B as you do at the moment in P2. There are still going to be 4 professional marks available. In section A of the exam paper, there are going to be 2 compulsory questions. Question 1 will be groups based. It will require you to carry out calculations associated with group accounting, but it will also require you to be able to give a discussion primarily surrounding why it is you've done what you've done, or the effect of accounting for groups in the manner that we account for groups. Question 2, a lot of it will focus in on ethics, and usually there will be a scenario given, or you'd expect that there's going to be a scenario given, and then you're going to have to identify normally what the ethical considerations are in that scenario. Current issues could appear as part of question 1 or 2. Alternatively, current issues can appear in part B. And as I say at the bottom there are 2 professional marks that will be available from the exam in section A. Then we've got section B. In section B, you've got 2 compulsory questions. They're 25 marks each. Individually, they're going to be scenario-based or case study-based questions. There's going to be an element of discussion and computation. Again, they'll be looking for your ability to discuss the application of accounting principles. Current issues could appear as part of section B. You will be expected in section B to give an appraisal of financial or non-financial information from a stakeholder's perspective. So in other words, you won't necessarily be advising the examiner in your solution with regards to the impact of the accounting from the preparer's perspective. So usually at the moment in P2, you're preparing the financial statements, or you're advising the company who are preparing the financial statements, and you need to explain to them the impact of particular accounting issues from the preparer's perspective. With regards to SBR, it could be from any stakeholder's perspective. So you could be advising, for example, the impact of a particular accounting treatment on an investor in the form of a shareholder or a lender to the company. Again, on section B, there's going to be 2 professional marks available. In a nutshell, the long consolidated question that people who historically sat the P2 exam had become used to, that's gone. You won't be asked to produce a consolidated statement of financial position, a consolidated statement of cash flow, or a consolidated statement of comprehensive income. Instead, what they're going to do in question 1, it'll be a groups question. They might ask you to calculate goodwill. They might ask you to calculate the non-controlling interest. They may ask you to calculate the effect of a change in group structure. And then what they'll ask you to do is to discuss the accounting treatments that you've involved yourself with. So you need to explain what it is you're doing, why you're doing it, what impact it has. Second big difference that we have is that there's no choice anymore. Under the current regime, in section B of the P2 exam, you had 3 questions and you had to choose 2. Going forward with SBR, in section B, you'll have 2 questions, you've got to do the 2 of them. In section A, you've got 2 questions, you've got to do the 2 of them. The other big difference that's been identified is that there's going to be the requirement to appraise the financial information from a stakeholder's perspective. This will always be examined, and it's going to require candidates to be able to analyse performance using financial statements and any additional performance measures that might be utilised by the company. Okay, I've mentioned analysis and interpretation. When you're looking at analysis and interpretation, you know for a fact at the outset that this is going to be examined on Part B of the exam paper. It could come up as well on Part A. It's going to require for you to interpret the financial statements from the perspective of different stakeholders. So what does that mean? Well, the approach that you're going to be looking to adopt is to identify what the issue is. And then after you've identified what the issue is, you'll be expected to discuss how the specific stakeholder in the question is going to be impacted by the specific issue in the question or at hand. So let's say, for example, you've been told that the company have incorrectly accounted for the revaluation surplus on a piece of plant, and they've incorrectly accounted for it as a gain in the profit and loss account. If we were to do that, if we were to recognise a profit on the increase in the value of a piece of plant using the revaluation model in profit and loss, well then that's going to overstate profit. It's going to give a shareholder the impression that the profitability is higher than it otherwise should be. It's going to have an impact on earnings per share. It's going to have an impact on the share price. Perhaps the share price becomes inflated. So what you've done is you've identified that there's an issue. There's an accounting issue with regards to the way the company have accounted for a revaluation surplus. You then have to discuss the impact that that issue is going to have on a stakeholder, and that stakeholder could be a shareholder rather than it being the preparer of the accounts. And then you have to be able to discuss and explain what the appropriate accounting treatment is. So you'll identify that the revaluation surplus shouldn't have gone to the P&L. It should instead have been recognised in other comprehensive income, and therefore it shouldn't have an impact on the company's earnings per share. Okay, I mentioned earlier that when you're assessing the performance of an entity using its financial statements or other financial metrics, we need to have an understanding of what other financial metrics might be involved. Well, it could be a situation that a company uses adjusted profit. A company, in determining how they performed for the period, might look at adjusted profit in the form of EBITDA. And if they use earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortization, well then they're using that particular metric in order to assess their performance. You might be expected to discuss the benefits, the disadvantages of doing so. You might be expected to discuss the implications of using that type of a metric in assessing performance. And you might be expected to calculate that metric and then to identify performance based on your calculation. Company might use KPIs, and if they use KPIs, again, you might be expected to assess the financial performance utilising those KPIs, and again to discuss advantages or disadvantages, the implications of using that particular metric, and then perhaps to calculate the outcome of that metric and to be able to give a discussion. The other thing that's quite important and becoming more important is the narrative that comes into financial statements. More and more companies present more and more narrative in their financial statements now. And I suppose that leads itself then into the whole area of integrated reporting, which is a methodology of producing the results for an entity together with an assessment of the value that can be created by that entity in the short, medium and long term, whereby there's a lot more narrative in the annual report. And again, you need to be able to utilise that narrative in order to be able to assess performance or to analyse performance. As I mentioned at the bottom of that slide there, we need to be able to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of individual performance metrics. We need to be able to evaluate the performance of an entity using the performance metrics that they do adopt. Just giving a quick example here on a slide with regards to CRH. This is an example of other metrics that are used by a company to assess performance rather than simply looking at the income statement or an earnings per share that's calculated using IAS 33. Or the statement of cash flow or the statement of financial position. Many companies present financial highlights in the manner that you can see on the screen here. They're looking at sales. They're identifying the change in the value of sales since last year. They're looking at EBITDA. They're looking at their EBITDA margin. Sometimes with a company, when they calculate their EBITDA, they might specifically leave out exceptional items, whether they be gains or losses. And again, in being able to identify a holistic approach to the assessment of the financial performance of a company utilising their financial statements, we'd need to be able to evaluate whether or not the particular entity in question is doing well or it's doing badly. We'd have to be, we would be expected, I should say, to adjust their individual metrics if they've made mistakes in the method that they've used to account for transactions. And we'd need to be able to discuss the advantages and the disadvantages of the specific metrics that they're utilising. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that's going to come up in Section B. You're going to have to assess the financial performance of an entity using appropriate financial metrics from financial statements, from narrative in financial statements, using KPIs, adjusting the individual metrics for any mistakes that might have been made in the preparation of the accounts, and then to be able to give a discussion. There are a couple of topics that have been removed from the syllabus. You won't have to deal with complex group structures. Complex group structures would have been a regular examinable topic that would have come up on P2. But complex group structures which involve you making an investment in an entity and then that entity making an investment in another entity, that's being removed. Entity reconstructions are being removed, and the whole discussion about the convergence of national and international standard setters, that's been removed as well. Okay, to give a quick example of the new approach, under the examination approach that they had with P2, question 1, 35 marks, would always require you to calculate and to present the statement of financial position, the statement of cash flow, or the statement of comprehensive income for an entity. To give an example here from the specimen exam paper, you're asked for 10 marks, explain to the directors of Cutchin with suitable workings how goodwill should have been calculated on the acquisition of House and Mac, showing the adjustments which need to be made to the consolidated financial statements to correct any errors by the finance director. The first important point to notice here is the question starts off asking you to explain. You have to therefore give a discursive answer. So it is important that you're able to calculate the goodwill figure that they're asking you to calculate, and there will be marks available to calculate the goodwill, but then you're going to have marks available for the discussion on how you've calculated the goodwill, what figures you've utilised, why you utilise those figures. A good approach to that style of a question is, on the first page in your examination booklet, do your calculation. Calculate your goodwill figure. Identify the fair value of the net assets, including any contingent liabilities. Identify the fair value of the consideration. After you've done your calculation, on the next page, get into a discussion of how you've done that calculation, where the figures came from, how you determine the figures. In order for you to be able to calculate goodwill, sure, by the time you're finished doing your course and you're presenting yourself for the exam, you're going to be aware that you need to identify the fair value of the consideration. In the discussion, you need to talk about what elements are included. We've got the fair value of cash. We've got the market value of any assets that we've transferred. We've got the present value of any deferred consideration. We've taken into consideration contingent consideration and discuss how you'd value the contingent consideration. We need to include a value for the NCI. Why do you include NCI in the calculation? What are the two methods of valuing the NCI for the purpose of calculating goodwill? Why would you use one method over the other method? How do you determine the value for the NCI if you use the proportionate method or if you use the full goodwill method? We need to identify the net assets that exist at the date of the business combination. You're going to have to discuss the basic recognition requirements in accordance with IFRS 3. You're going to have to discuss, are there any exceptions in IFRS 3? A pretty obvious one that you'd come across there would be the fact that when you identify the fair value of the net assets, we need to incorporate the intangible assets that the subsidiary company have control over that they may not have been entitled to recognise in their individual financial statements. For example, internally generated brands, customer lists, internally generated trademarks. They're included in the fair value of the net asset exercise in accordance with IFRS 3, but they wouldn't be included in the individual accounts in accordance with IAS 38. Another thing in IFRS 3 is that when you identify the fair value of the net assets, you've got to include the fair value of any contingent liabilities. IAS 37 doesn't allow you to recognise a contingent liability in an individual company's accounts, but we need to incorporate it into the goodwill calculation if it exists on the date of the business combination. Then you get your answer, goodwill. You need to explain what goodwill is. You need to explain why we show goodwill on the balance sheet as an asset. If it was a negative goodwill figure, what do we mean by negative goodwill? Why is negative goodwill considered a bargain purchase? Why is negative goodwill recognised in the income statement? So it's a big change about whereby you're not getting your marks just purely for your ability to do the calculation. You're getting your marks from your ability to do the calculation and to discuss and to be able to explain why you've incorporated the figures into your calculation that you've incorporated. Okay, a point that's been made, and it's a strong point that's been made on SBR, is they're not looking for an essay-style answer to your solutions. They don't want a big essay. Effectively, what you could use is an extended bullet point style. So have individual bullet points, but bullet points aren't just a sentence. Bullet points are a couple of sentences that tease out the issue. So the solution will look like a makeup of quite a number of individual paragraphs, and you can take it that each point that you make and tease out, you're going to get a mark for it if it's relevant, if it incorporates the information that's given in the question, in order for you to be able to demonstrate that you can apply your knowledge. So not a big essay, individual paragraphs made up of individual bullet points, where each point is a point in itself, it's teased out, it's linked back into the information that's given in the question, and it demonstrates your understanding of the calculation that you've just carried out. To give an example of what I mean by that, let's imagine you're given a question, and in the question we've been told that the company have incorrectly accounted for interest or borrowing costs in accordance with IAS 23. One type of an answer might be, point number 1 as I have here, John is acting unethically because he's asking Lucy to ignore IAS 23. That's not going to cut the mustard. At the end of the day, you're simply saying that John is acting unethically because he's asking Lucy to ignore IAS 23. But what does IAS 23 tell you to do? What is it that Lucy has been asked to do that's incorrect? Why is it unethical? If you look at the second point, which is still only a bullet point, but it's been teased out, IAS 23 requires that borrowing costs are capitalised only if it meets set criteria. Now you're demonstrating that there's a relevant accounting standard and you know what the principles in the standard are. John is acting unethically because, in order to increase profits, he's asking Lucy to capitalise borrowing costs that IAS 23 requires to be expensed. And if it's a case that you, as the preparer of the accounts, are trying to ensure that the profits are inflated beyond the level that you know they should be at, that doesn't demonstrate integrity. And if you're not demonstrating integrity, well, then you're not acting ethically. So the two answers, as you can see, are basically making the same point. But what the examiner wants you to do in SBR is to be able to tease out the point in a bullet point format in an individual paragraph to demonstrate your knowledge of an individual standard or an accounting issue, to be able to demonstrate the application of that knowledge to the facts that are given in the question. Okay, so how is the course going to be structured in order to make sure you're prepared to go in to do the exam SBR and to get that magic 50 or above it in order to pass the exam? Well, first of all, we've got lectures. The lectures, I should say, will go through all of the technical content. Each of the individual accounting standards will be looked at, the reasoning behind the standards, the principles in the standards, what do the standards require us to do, what calculations are involved. We need to be able to get our heads around the principles of the standard. So when you're looking at something like IAS 37, why does a provision require us to recognise a liability? You need to understand the principle, link it back into the conceptual framework, and then to be able to tease out, apply it to the facts that are given in the question or in the case study, and then to be able to do any calculations that will back up that you are in fact able to do it. We'll be using practice questions. Invariably, we'll be using past exam questions. We'll be using the BPP study material so that the updated questions where they've taken many of the past exam questions and they've changed the requirements in the question to demonstrate the type of approach that will be required under SBR. We'll be using those practice questions in class. I'll be giving people homework. I'll expect that you do the homework because it's only with practice and with a bit of direction of where you might be going wrong that you get good at being able to give the information back to the examiner in the format that the examiner is looking for. Halfway through the course, we'll be doing a progress test. Progress test will involve you having to do a test. I'll let you do it at home. You can do it and email it in to me. You can come into the college and do it in the college if you want. But it just kind of tests you on the material that we've covered up to the halfway point to see are you on track and if there's any changes that you need to make between the halfway point I should say, and the end of the course to get back on track if you've deviated from it. We'll have a revision course. The revision course will be using past exam questions, again, which have been amended in order to demonstrate the type of approach that's expected of SBR and to cover all of the topics again that are on the syllabus. And finally then we have a mock exam, and you need to sit the mock exam, you need to get the exam practice so that you're able to hone your timing, hone your ability to be able to apply your knowledge to given scenarios, be able to give extended bullet point answers that tease out the individual issues, and to be able to see exactly where you can pick up those 4 professional marks that are available between Section A and Section B. As I mentioned a moment ago, we will be using BPP Platinum approved materials. In addition to that, on Moodle, I'll have uploaded online questions that you need to attempt. The online questions on Moodle will test your ability and your knowledge on F7 standard material. And F7 being the subject that leads you into SBR, it's important that you have the basic knowledge that's required of F7. Weekly homework, as I've mentioned already, will be given. I'll correct the homework, I'll give it back to you, I'll give direction if it's a case that you're deviating from where you need to be. If you're on track, at least you'll have the confidence of knowing you're on track. homework is very important. There's absolutely no point until you waiting until the day of the exam for you to make an attempt to do a question that you're going to allow a third party to correct for you, the third party being the SCCA. And if it's a case that you're not up to scratch, you're going to find out when the results come out that they're giving you an opportunity to make another attempt at the exam. You don't want to be in that boat. The best thing to do is do the homework on a weekly basis, hand up the assignments, get the feedback, get on track so that by the time you get to the exam, you're fully confident that you're capable of going in there and getting the magic 50 plus that you need in order to pass the exam. And SBR is not changing like SBL, as I said at the very start of this presentation. SBR is an evolution, it's not a revolution. It's P2 examined in a different format. There are some easy marks that are being missed out on now because you're not getting the benefit of adding individual financial statements together in a set of group accounts, as would have been the case under the P2 exam. But even though there's a few easy marks being lost out there, there's many other easy marks available if it's a case that you can hone in your ability to discuss the calculations that you're doing. If you have any questions or queries on SBR, by all means drop me an email. My email address is liam.doran@accountancyschool.ie. If you log on to the accountancyschool.ie website /SBR, you'll be able to see the information that we've uploaded in order to see exactly what's expected of you for the SBR exam. And other than that, all I can do is wish you the very, very best of luck if you've got exams coming up in June. If you're looking to take the course for SBR in September, I look forward to seeing you. And if there are any other queries or questions you have, please don't hesitate to give me a shout. Thanks very much.